Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are wrestling with, well, probably the single most important challenge facing the digital enterprise, this unbreakable link between speed and safety. The modern mandate is relentless velocity DevOps, but if that speed introduces risk, it's not really valuable, is it? So we are tackling DevSecOps. We've gathered a massive stack of sources, architectural blueprints, career reports, cultural studies, and we're going to try and distill the essential knowledge you need to master security in modern cloud-native development. We're really diving deep into the necessary cultural shifts, the advanced technical strategies, and the foundational skills you need on your resume to thrive in this hyper-fast environment. Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah, absolutely. Our mission today is, I think, clarity. We really want to move beyond that traditional, often frustrating narrative of security just being a bottleneck, right? That friction that slows down deployment. Instead, we're looking at security as an embedded, continuous, and importantly, enabling practice. That's the whole shift left idea in the development pipeline. Now, technical expertise in cloud infrastructure is absolutely vital, make no mistake. But our sources show again and again that it's almost just the price of entry. We'll examine why success really hinges on that cultural transformation and how the zero trust model fundamentally changes the defensive playbook for the distributed cloud.
That roadmap sounds incredibly valuable, especially for anyone looking to advance in this field. And before we accelerate into that first section, we do want to immediately thank one of our core sponsors, vibehack.dev. Seriously, if you're committed to career advancement and you need a proven resource dedicated to helping you master this complex landscape of modern tech and skill development, vibehack.dev is exactly what you should check out. Right, so let's start at the beginning then. The evolution from DevOps to DevSecOps. If DevOps was all about collaboration between DevOps and Ops, increasing automation and speed, what specifically does adding that sec part really require?
Well, DevSecOps is essentially the cultural and automated layer that ensures security protocols aren't just an afterthought. They have to be integrated into all aspects of that DevOps pipeline. Think about how we started, right? Traditional waterfall development. Security was this reactive audit right at the very end. And often that meant expensive, really disruptive rework.
Yeah, I remember those days. Painful.
Exactly. Then DevOps gave us speed, continuous delivery, but businesses quickly realized the risk exposure created by that speed if security wasn't baked in from day one. That's where DevSecOps came from. It shifts security from being like a single reactive gate to a continuous, proactive, and iterative approach. And the pressure is immense. In today's tech world, delivery cycles can be measured in hours, sometimes even minutes.
Wow.
So DevSecOps engineers, they have to balance both that rapidity and security to streamline the software development cycle. If your process is slow, your product becomes irrelevant fast. But if your product is fast but insecure, well, your business is seriously at risk.
That mandate for early integration, that's the shifting left concept you mentioned. How does that actually manifest within the established phases of the software development lifecycle, the SDLC? It can't just mean running one tool earlier, can it?
Oh, not at all, no. It requires a really profound phase-by-phase understanding of the SDLC. So take the planning and blueprinting phases. Security teams have to be involved right there, doing threat modeling, defining secure requirements before a single line of code is even written.
Okay, so upfront involvement.
Right. Then, during programming, you have tools checking code quality as it's being committed. Think SaaS tools. We'll get into those. In testing, you integrate dynamic analysis testing, the running application. By the time you reach deployment, the security checks are less about finding brand new vulnerabilities, hopefully, and more about ensuring environmental compliance, like checking configurations.
So it's layered throughout.
Exactly. This systematic integration at every sequential phase is what ensures weaknesses are identified proactively, not reactively. That's how you fortify the entire process.
Okay, that sounds like a technical orchestration problem, solved by just buying the right scanning software and plugging it into the CI/CD pipeline, right? But our sources, they were really emphatic that the technical side is almost secondary to this socio-technical perspective. Why is the human element, the culture, such a sticking point?
That's a great question because it gets to the heart of it. Security fundamentally changes workflows. It requires behavioral adjustments, and that's hard. Successful transition isn't about what tools you install, it's about who uses them and how they actually collaborate. DevSecOps really demands, true cross-functional collaboration. You need security specialists integrated directly into development and ops teams, not sitting in a separate silo.
Breaking down those walls.
Precisely. This creates a culture of shared security responsibility, where developers feel empowered not punished, to find and fix security issues early on.
And what happens when that cultural integration fails? What are the big organizational challenges that leaders really need to watch out for?
Well, the primary challenges we see are resistance to change, just natural human inertia, and these entrenched organizational silos. Security over here, dev over there, ops somewhere else. And technical reports, they often miss this point entirely. They focus only on instrumental outcomes, like, reduce time to market or cost effectiveness, which are important, obviously.
Sure, bottom line.
But our sources pointed out that research frequently neglects the humanistic outcomes, things like employee job satisfaction or the well-being of the development team when they're under this constant pressure. If the security team just acts as the department of no, just blocking things, job satisfaction plummets, burnout goes up, and guess what? Those instrumental goals fail anyway because people start finding ways around the controls. Shadow IT.
Right, the path of least resistance.
Exactly. So leaders have to recognize that just forcing a tool onto a team without getting their buy-in, without proper training, that just creates resentment. It doesn't actually create security. You've got to address the human factor first.
Okay, so culture first. Then once the culture is, let's say, primed for this, how do we operationalize that shared responsibility through automation? That seems like where security as code comes in.
Exactly. Security as code, which often falls under the umbrella of policy as code, is the mechanism for achieving consistency and scale. We treat all security configurations, compliance policies, infrastructure definitions, just like application code, meaning it's version controlled in Git, it's tested, it's peer reviewed, and it's integrated directly into the automated pipeline.
Okay, in infrastructure as code, IAC you mentioned that's mandatory here. So if I'm using, say, Terraform to spin up an AWS environment, how do I use IEC to make sure that environment is secure by default instead of having to manually audit it afterwards?
Right. The power of IEC is that consistency. Tools like Terraform let you define repeatable, reliable environments from code. The security application comes through policy enforcement tools, think things like Open Policy Agent, OPA, or maybe HashiCorp Sentinel. These tools hook directly into the ISE workflow. So before Terraform even tries to deploy anything, these tools automatically evaluate the configuration code against predefined security policies.
Ah, so it's a pre-check.
Exactly. For instance, let's say a developer writes Terraform code trying to deploy an AWS S3 bucket but forgets to enable mandatory encryption. OPA, configured with a policy requiring encryption, would automatically reject that Terraform plan or apply.
And tell the developer why.
Yes, and crucially, provide immediate feedback on the specific policy violation. So the policy is enforced essentially, consistently, automatically before any insecure configuration ever hits your cloud environment. That level of consistency across maybe hundreds of projects, that's essential for modern security.
All right, so if that's the culture and the framework, let's turn our attention to the person who's often leading this charge, the DevSecOps engineer. For anyone listening who's thinking, hey, I want to move into this, what are the absolute mandatory technical proficiencies?
Okay, the single most mandatory skill, without a doubt, is automation proficiency. Advanced automation. You have to be able to implement, maintain, and critically troubleshoot the automation tools and frameworks that handle security tests, compliance monitoring, code analysis, deployment, the whole cycle. Without solid automation, the speed of modern delivery is just impossible to keep up with securely.
Makes sense. And within the CI/CD pipeline itself, what specific tools or types of tools are we talking about?
Yeah, expertise in specific scanning tools is definitely non-negotiable. First up, static code analyzers, or SAS tools. These look at your source code before it runs. They're great at finding things like potential buffer overflows or improper input sanitization right in the code itself. Our sources often recommend open source alternatives like SonarQube, especially for learners. It's great for getting hands-on experience integrating it right into your CI process.
Okay, so ST looks at the code I wrote, but modern apps are mostly built from other people's code, right? Open source libraries and dependencies.
Exactly. And that's where software composition analysis, or SCA, tools come in. You mentioned SNCC earlier, that's a popular one. Modern applications rely heavily on these open source dependencies, libraries, frameworks, you name it, pulled from public repos like NPM or Maven Central. The problem is these dependencies often contain known vulnerabilities. SCA tools like SNCC scan all those imported components, cross-reference them against vulnerability databases, alert the team to the risks, and even suggest compatible safe patch versions. It's critical.
Got it. SAS for my code, SCA for the dependencies. What about the engine driving all this automation?
Right, the CI/CD engine itself. While newer tools like GitHub Actions are definitely gaining traction, Jenkins is still, a primary tool used globally for orchestrating this whole flow, managing the build, triggering the SAST-CA scans, promoting artifacts, deploying. So a DevSecOps engineer absolutely needs to understand how to configure, scale, and importantly, secure that orchestration tool itself. Jenkins has its own security considerations.
We touched on static analysis,
Yeah.
SAST. What about dynamic analysis, DAST? Where does that fit in? And critically, what about fixing the problems once all these tools find them? Finding is one thing, fixing is another.
Good point. DAST tools are different. They test the running application, often in a staging environment. They simulate attacks like a real hacker might, probing for vulnerabilities that only appear when the application is live, maybe due to a configuration issue or how different components interact.
So they complement each other.
Absolutely. You need both SAST and DAST for comprehensive coverage. But as you said, finding the flaw is only half the battle. A huge part of the DevSecOps role is vulnerability remediation. And it's funny, despite all this advanced tooling, we still see the classics pop up all the time. Cross-site scripting, XSS, SQL injection staples from the OWASP top 10 list, they haven't gone away.
Still relevant then.
Very. So the engineer needs to not only detect these rapidly using the tools, but also prioritize which ones to fix first based on exploitability, potential impact, business context, and then they need to be proficient in actually helping developers fix them or implementing mitigating controls and having efficient incident response plans ready.
Okay, now let's talk about the environment itself. Everything nowadays seems to rely on these ephemeral, distributed cloud services. The security perimeter isn't just a firewall sitting in a corner anymore, is it? Which brings us neatly to cloud security proficiency. Whether you're operating primarily on AWS, Azure, or Google Cloud Platform, GCP, this is just non-negotiable today. DevSecOps pros must master configuring and managing the native cloud security services, architecting secure cloud environments, and critically, managing identity and access management, IAM.
IAM, yes. You could argue that IAM is perhaps the single most critical technical skill set in the cloud today. Think about it. In a world that's distributed, often serverless, heavily containerized, managing who or increasingly what, like a service or a function, has access to which resources. That is
No.
the new perimeter.
It's all about identity and permissions.
Exactly. If you mess up IAM, if you implement overly permissive roles, you've essentially built an unlocked backdoor right into your cloud environment. An attacker compromises one small service with excessive permissions, and suddenly they can move laterally or access sensitive data. Mastering the principle of least privilege access within IAM is absolutely fundamental.
The complexity here, especially in securing these large distributed environments, it really demands rigorous pre-employment assessment standards, doesn't it? And actually, this is a good moment to thank our sponsor, clientassist.vibehack.dev. They really highlight this critical need for specialized assessment tools. As this field becomes more vital, organizations need that assurance, that proof, that new hires truly possess demonstrable expertise in these specific areas of cloud security, particularly IAM management. So check out clientassist.vibehack.dev. Okay, let's talk career path. If I'm, say, an experienced software engineer listening to this, is DevSecOps my next logical step, or is there more of a ramp-up required?
That's a common question, and our sources are pretty unequivocal on this. DevSecOps is generally not an entry-level position. It's usually a niche role you transition into after building a solid foundation elsewhere. You typically need significant experience first in either software engineering, really understanding code structure, testing methodologies, deployment pipelines, or in security engineering, understanding threat landscapes, compliance frameworks, auditing techniques.
So you need fundamentals first.
Absolutely. You need a firm grasp of underlying concepts like Git for version control, comfort with the Linux command line, bash scripting for automation, solid programming logic, before you really try to tackle integrating security automation across the lifecycle. If you start out as a junior or maybe mid-level DevSecOps engineer, your main focus is going to be on execution, on technical delivery, building the pipelines, configuring the tools, responding to alerts.
But the path upward to senior or staff level DevSecOps roles.
That's where the shift happens. It moves dramatically away from just technical delivery towards setting strategy, influencing teams, and dealing with much more ambiguity across the organization.
This is where it gets really interesting for me. You said earlier that soft skills often become the limiting factor for promotion, maybe even more than technical depth. Can you elaborate on how these senior roles specifically lean so heavily on those softer skills?
Yeah, absolutely. Because when you move to a senior or staff level, the problems you're tackling are no longer just technical code or configuration issues. They become abstract, ambiguous, often political, organizational challenges. Senior roles require you to be, in effect, an internal diplomat, a translator, and a change agent.
Can you give some examples?
Sure. Think about negotiation and communication. You constantly have to translate abstract technical risks like a CVSS score for vulnerability into concrete business risk and potential monetary impact. You need to do this to convince non-technical executive leadership to actually allocate budget and provide sponsorship for security initiatives. That's a communication skill.
Right, talking their language.
Exactly. Second, mediation. You'll inevitably find yourself mediating conflicts between, say, a development team that's laser-focused on feature velocity and a security or compliance team focused on rigorous adherence to policy. You can't just point to the policy document. You have to understand both sides and engineer a technical and cultural solution that satisfies the core needs of both. That requires empathy and negotiation.
Finding the win-win, or at least the acceptable compromise.
Precisely. And third, mentoring and inspiration. As a senior person, you're expected to mentor junior engineers to help level up the whole team. You need to drive continuous improvement not just in your own work, but across multiple teams. You need to inspire a proactive security culture, not just enforce rules. Technical aptitude is just assumed at that level. It's the ability to influence without direct authority that really separates senior and staff roles from mid-level.
So that commitment to continuous learning we always hear about, it isn't just about mastering the next Kubernetes feature, is it? It's about self-discipline across the board, including professional development.
Precisely. The field changes constantly. New threats, new tools, new cloud services. One expert in our sources actually recommended carving out at least 30 minutes every single day, like non-negotiable calendar time, just to learn something new. Maybe study an emerging threat report, work through a tutorial on a new tool, or study for a certification. It requires real, sustained discipline. And it's also vital to leverage any employer benefits you have. If your company offers tuition reimbursement or pays for certifications, use it. It creates a commitment device, right? It makes it more likely you'll actually follow through on that ambitious learning goal instead of letting it slide when things get busy.
Okay, we've established the culture we need DevSecOps and the skills required for the engineers. Now let's pivot to the essential architecture, especially for this dynamic, hyper-distributed cloud environment we keep talking about. That brings us to Zero Trust Architecture, or ZTA. Can you start by explaining why the security model many of us grew up with, the castle and moat, just completely fails here?
Yeah. The castle and moat model, it relies on building a really strong perimeter defense, like a firewall. The idea was keep the bad guys out, and once someone or something is inside the network, well, it's generally trusted. That worked, sort of, when applications lived in a nice, contained, monolithic data center.
Right, a defined perimeter.
Exactly. But that model just collapses in the cloud-native world. Why? Because the perimeter is completely fluid, it's almost meaningless. Cloud-native systems are built on dynamic, ephemeral components. Think microservices chattering over APIs, orchestrated by tools like Kubernetes, running inside short-lived containers, maybe using serverless functions. The whole environment is inherently distributed and volatile. There is no stable inside anymore. And we see the evidence of this model failing constantly. Vulnerabilities found in dev or test environments, which often have weaker controls, frequently become the entry point for major production breaches. It proves that relying on implicit trust once something is inside is probably the biggest security liability we have today.
Okay, so ZTA basically says, forget the moat. Treat every request, every connection as potentially hostile, even if it's coming from within our own network. What's the absolute core principle?
The core ZTA tenet, the mantra really is, never trust, always verify, period, full stop. This mandates, practically speaking, 3 key things. First, continuous verification. You constantly verify identity and context for every single access request, not just once at the perimeter. Second, least privilege access. You ensure that entities, whether human users or automated services, only have the absolute minimum permissions required to perform their immediate task, and nothing more. And third, comprehensive auditing. You log and audit all operations to detect and respond to anomalies. It's all about eliminating that dangerous implicit trust that allowed attackers, once they breached the perimeter, to move laterally throughout the network almost unchecked.
That sounds logical, but implementing it across a massive, sprawling ecosystem, maybe hundreds or even thousands of microservices, that sounds daunting. How does an organization even begin to implement this in practice?
It is a journey, not a switch you flip overnight. You typically start with microsegmentation. Instead of having a large, flat network where potentially everything can communicate with everything else, you divide the network into much smaller, isolated segments. Often, a segment might contain just one microservice or a small group of related services.
What does that achieve?
It allows you to apply extremely precise, granular security policies to each tiny segment. So if one microservice or one segment does get compromised, the attacker's ability to move laterally to other parts of the network, what we call the blast radius, is severely limited. They're contained. And alongside microsegmentation, you absolutely must apply strict access controls. Since every microservice is essentially treated as foreign, every single communication between services must be fully authenticated and authorized.
So even if Service A and Service B are running on the same cluster, they don't automatically trust each other.
Not in a true zero-trust model, no. It's not enough that they're both internal. If Service A wants to fetch data from Service B, Service A has to cryptographically prove its identity and prove it has the authorization for that specific data call every time.
Wow. Okay, that level of per-request verification seems like it would introduce significant complexity, maybe operational overhead. What are the key architectural components that help manage and enforce this? We mentioned API gateways and service meshes earlier.
Right. They play different but complementary roles. The API gateway typically acts as the primary entry point for external traffic coming into your microservice architecture from the internet or other networks. It's a crucial enforcement point for things like rate limiting, external user authentication, maybe basic authorization checks before the request even gets forwarded to any internal service.
So it guards the main entrance.
Exactly. Then, the service mesh tools like Istio or Linkerd are common examples focuses on managing and securing the service-to-service communication within the cluster. This is absolutely critical for implementing ZTA internally. A key feature they provide is mutual TLS, or MTLS.
Okay, you've mentioned mutual TLS a couple of times. Can you break that down? Why is it better or different from the standard TLS we use for HTTPS websites?
Sure. Traditional TLS, like when you connect to your bank's website, ensures that you, the client, verify the server's identity, making sure it's really the bank, and that the communication is encrypted. It's primarily one-way verification. Mutual TLS is different because it's two-way verification. Both the client, let's say Service A, and the server, Service B, cryptographically verify each other's identity using certificates before any application data is exchanged.
Ah, so they both have to prove who they are to each other.
Precisely. If a compromised microservice somehow tries to initiate communication with a legitimate one, the service mesh, enforcing MTLS, will reject the connection attempt because the certificates won't mutually authenticate. It ensures that only explicitly trusted, authenticated services can talk to each other, securing that internal communication channel at every single hop.
That sounds incredibly thorough. And you mentioned earlier the evidence shows this strategy actually works. What kind of results are organizations seeing?
Yeah, the research is quite compelling. One study indicated that organizations that successfully implement zero-trust architecture experience, on average, 42% fewer security incidents compared to those still operating primarily on traditional perimeter-based models.
42% fewer incidents. That's substantial.
It really is. It drastically limits the potential impact of breaches when they do occur. It often helps streamline regulatory compliance efforts because of the explicit controls, and it generally provides much better visibility into network traffic patterns.
Security is never static, though. It's always a moving target. Looking ahead, what emerging trends are likely to influence ZDA implementation over, say, the next 5 to 10 years?
Two big ones stand out. First, we're definitely seeing a rapid shift towards AI-driven security. This involves using machine learning, particularly anomaly detection and behavioral analytics. The idea is to establish detailed baselines of normal user and, crucially, normal service behavior within the ZTA environment. So if a service suddenly starts trying to access data it's never accessed before or communicate with unusual endpoints, the system can automatically flag that as suspicious, maybe even isolate the service proactively. It moves security from being purely reactive cleanup to more predictive threat hunting, which is essential for fulfilling ZTA's continuous verification mandate in complex systems.
Using AI to watch the machines.
In a sense, yes. And second, more strategically, organizations, especially those dealing with highly sensitive, long-lived data, absolutely must begin planning for post-quantum cryptography, or PQC. The future threat posed by large-scale quantum computers potentially breaking our current public key encryption standards, the ones underpinning TLS, digital signatures, etc., is considered very real by cryptographers. Organizations need to start developing transition plans now to eventually migrate to quantum-resistant algorithms to protect their data long-term. This adds yet another layer of complexity to future infrastructure and security planning.
Wow, planning your quantum computing. Yeah. The future is definitely complex. But integrating this strict verifying security philosophy right from the start, shifting it left, that's exactly what the DevSecOps culture demands, isn't it? And that really underscores the importance of secure development cultures. We want to thank our sponsor, devsecops.vibehack.dev, for supporting this deep dive into precisely these topics, the architectures and the cultural shifts needed for modern security. #DeFi, organizational responsibilities, and security maturity. Okay, let's pivot back from the deep technical implementation details to the highest level again, the business impact. When we discuss security, it's crucial to recognize it, as you said, as a fundamental business risk issue. It's not just an IT department problem anymore. What are the real financial stakes of failing to implement these kinds of modern controls?
The financial stakes are frankly escalating quite rapidly. The latest reports show the average global cost of a single data breach now exceeds $4 million USD. That's the average.
For $1 million.
And it gets worse. For organizations that heavily support remote work, which is most organizations these days, that average cost is reportedly $1.07 million higher. Why? Because the attack surface is inherently more distributed, more complex to monitor and secure when people are working from anywhere. And it really goes beyond just the direct monetary costs of incident response and recovery. Think about regulatory non-compliance. Under strict laws like GDPR in Europe or CCPA in California, failing to protect sensitive data can lead to absolutely devastating fines.
Right, fines that can cripple a company.
They can, and crucially, it can also lead to criminal and fiduciary penalties for the executive leadership team if they are found to be negligent in their duty of care regarding data protection. So cloud security isn't just a technical option anymore. It's increasingly seen as a core fiduciary responsibility of the board and C-suite.
Given that urgency, that level of risk, where does the industry generally stand on maturity? Are organizations actually keeping pace with the risks posed by all this cloud-native complexity we've been discussing?
Well, overall, the data suggests there's still a pretty significant maturity gap. Many organizations, they've maybe piloted some cloud security tools or partially implemented certain controls in some areas, but they're often still falling behind in the full, consistent, enterprise-wide implementation of the comprehensive cloud security controls needed to truly mitigate risk effectively. One solution we see gaining traction to drive that consistent maturity across the board is the establishment of a formal Cloud Security Center of Excellence, or COE.
A center of excellence.
Yeah.
What exactly does a COE do that's different from just, say, having a security team?
A COE is typically envisioned as a cross-functional team. It brings together experts from security, infrastructure, development, legal, compliance, and importantly, it needs direct sponsorship from executive leadership. It acts as a centralized brain trust, or maybe a guiding coalition. Its job is to set clear, overarching security goals for the cloud, to vet and approve standard architectures and best practices, and then to help enforce those centralized policies consistently across all the diverse development teams and different cloud environments the organization might have. It's really about standardization, enablement, and making the secure way the easy way, rather than having every team try to reinvent the security wheel, often poorly for every new project.
You mentioned earlier, and I think this is key, that you can't just wave your hands and say security is everyone's job. For accountability to mean anything, it requires clearly defined role-based mandates. Can we break down who is specifically responsible for what in a mature DevSecOps environment?
Yes, that clarity is absolutely crucial. Accountability has to be specific. First, executive leadership. They must be the primary sponsors. They allocate the necessary resources, people, budget, tools. They need to lead by example. For instance, rigorously using multi-factor authentication, MFA, themselves for critical business systems sends a powerful message. And they need to publicly champion security initiatives, reinforcing their importance. Without that visible executive buy-in, any large-scale DevSecOps program is likely to falter due to resource constraints or internal resistance.
Okay, sponsorship from the top. What about the security teams?
The security and compliance teams, their role is to define and help enforce the policies. But here's the critical part. Their mandate must be to securely enable the business, not just block it. They cannot be perceived as the bottleneck. A mature security team provides developers with pre-approved secure components, templates like secure Terraform modules, and automated tools that actually make the secure path the easiest path to take.
Enabling, not blocking. Got it. And for the engineers actually building things, the DevOps teams.
They are under constant pressure to deliver features quickly. We know that. Therefore, their specific mandate within DevSecOps is to integrate security requirements, those findings, from threat modeling. The IAC policies we talked about right at the absolute beginning of any new project or major feature development. That commitment to shifting left, doing security up front, avoids that incredibly painful and costly scenario where you have to stop a project late in the development cycle because a major security flaw or compliance violation is discovered just before release. That causes huge delays in rework.
And finally, what about just regular employees, the individual end users?
They have a critical role, too. Anyone in the organization who interacts with company systems or data must follow corporate governance, adhere to access policies like using strong passwords and MFA, and actively safeguard the data they're entrusted with. They're often the primary target of phishing attacks, so their vigilance and discipline really form the last line of human defense.
Okay, that breakdown is helpful. Let's look at a critical rising concern you touched on: data quality and validation, especially now in a world increasingly dominated by generative AI systems. Why is data quality suddenly becoming such a prominent security concern?
Right. Data quality has always impacted business outcomes, obviously. Garbage in, garbage out. But now, with the rise of Gen AI, poor data quality directly embeds risk in new ways. These Gen AI systems are trained on massive data sets. If that training data is flawed, if it's inaccurate, inconsistent, contains biases, or even reflects past security vulnerabilities, those flaws can become embedded within the AI models themselves. This can lead to unpredictable, potentially biased, or even insecure outcomes when the AI generates content or makes decisions. That's why, according to recent surveys, something like 64% of organizations now rate data quality as critically important. They recognize its foundational role for building trustworthy and secure intelligence systems.
So when organizations are testing or validating these new intelligent products before they go live, how does security validation stack up against other priorities?
It ranks extremely high, interestingly, second only to basic functional correctness. When asked about validating intelligent products, the most critical aspects identified by organizations were, first, functional correctness, does it do what it's supposed to? Cited by about 30%, but right behind that came security validation, is it secure, at 23%, and then data quality validation is the underlying data sound at 21%.
Security and data quality almost tied for second place.
Exactly. It clearly reflects the high-stakes nature of deploying these AI systems. And what's the primary driver forcing organizations to prioritize data improvement efforts? Overwhelmingly, it's regulatory requirements, cited by 31%. Compliance pressures are often the main catalyst that lights a fire under these data quality initiatives.
So, continuous auditing, policy enforcement, robust validation, and of course, assessing the talent you have to manage all this. These are all essential components to achieve that full organizational maturity in the cloud and AI era. And this seems like another perfect moment to thank our sponsor again, cloudassets.vibehack.dev, for supporting this critical conversation around the skills and strategies needed for secure cloud adoption and management. Assessing talent in this space is clearly paramount. #tags die zero. Conclusion and final thoughts. Well, this has been an incredibly detailed, really insightful deep dive into DevSecOps and Zero Trust. If we try to synthesize the key takeaways for everyone listening, it feels like the necessary shift really involves three core components. First, DevSecOps isn't just tools. It requires a truly collaborative culture of shared responsibility, embedding security early and often using things like policy as code.
Absolutely. Second, technical mastery is definitely non-negotiable. That means real proficiency in advanced automation, understanding the CI/CD toolchain like Jenkins or GitHub Actions, specific scanning tools, and deep cloud expertise, especially around identity and access management, IAM, and container security orchestration like Kubernetes.
Right. And third, for the underlying architecture, Zero Trust isn't just a buzzword. It's the essential security philosophy for these volatile cloud-native systems. And it has to be enforced through specific technical mechanisms like micro-segmentation and mutual TLS, often managed via service meshes.
That sums up the technical roadmap perfectly, I think. But if I could leave you, the listener, with just one core message, it's this. Your journey in this field, whether you're starting out or you're already senior, is one of continuous learning and adaptation. Yes, You absolutely must master the technical complexities, the cloud networking, the intricacies of IAM policies, the evolving container security models. But ultimately, long-term success, especially as you move into more senior or leadership roles, often relies less on what you know technically today and more on your ability to influence, to communicate effectively, and to drive difficult, sometimes uncomfortable cultural change across established teams and silos. That discipline, those soft skills, they really become the final frontier for impact.
So think about the immediate horizon then.
Yeah.
Where does this inherent tension between the drive for automated speed and the often slower pace of achieving cultural maturity and human validation? Where does that lead us next?
Yeah, that leads us to, I think, a really profound question for the near future. We found data showing the industry is rapidly adopting Gen AI. Something like 68% of respondents in one survey are already using Gen AI platforms for things like quality engineering and testing activities. That's fast adoption. Yet, as we've discussed, many organizations still struggle immensely with fundamental compliance enforcement, consistent security practices, and overcoming cultural resistance. We see that in the maturity gaps. The big question becomes, how will organizations ensure that the necessary human validation, the ethical considerations, and the cultural accountability mechanisms can actually keep pace with the accelerating speed of AI-enhanced security automation? If we just automate the creation and deployment of insecure or biased systems faster using AI, we're not actually improving security. We might just be increasing our risk exponentially. That friction, that gap between the technical velocity potentially enabled by AI and the human and cultural maturity needed to wield it responsibly, that feels like the defining challenge for the next 5 years in this space.
That is a fascinating and, quite provocative note to end on. A lot for our listeners to think about. But hopefully, you now have a much clearer framework to tackle this crucial topic head-on in your own work.
Absolutely. Start thinking about how to shift left today, even in small ways.
Excellent advice. A huge thank you again to all three of our sponsors for making this deep dive possible. CloudAssets.vibehack.dev, vibehack.dev, and DevSecOps.vibehack.dev. We really appreciate their support, and thank you for tuning in. We'll catch you next time for another deep dive.